What happened to that? Yes, we don't know. My name is Bradley. I'm a professor in the Department of English at the University of Victoria. I'm thrilled to be here. It's great to see you all. I'm delighted to be here on Poetic territory in Bamfield at the AMSC. I live in Oak Bay, neighborhood in Victoria, which is in the Lytton territory. And yeah, so you know, this is the third time I've taught here, and it's a real privilege to be here in Bamfield. This is Smokey Bear. This is not me. Smokey has told you, as you probably already know, that only you can prevent forest fires. I think this is no longer true. We increasingly know that forest fire prevention, or maybe more accurately, forest fire management, is the responsibility of everyone. And so part of my thinking about what I'm calling wildfire poetics has to do with how we are living with, and maybe even coming to terms with, wildfires as part of the world that here on the West Coast now inhabit. And I'm interested especially in talking to you about this here in Bamfield because this is such a wet place. Obviously, we are on the coast. It's been raining all week so far. It was raining all afternoon today. This is not a part of the world where we are accustomed to thinking about fire as one of the prevailing conditions. But as everyone who's been here for a while knows, this is somewhere that, like so many places in our part of the world, is actually profoundly affected by wildfire. So I want to think about what it means that people on the coast and in BC more generally are starting to think more vividly and more continuously, perhaps, about fire as something that is part of our world and part of our lives. And so, as part of this, we have new language for coming to terms with fire. So we might be talking about fire season, for example, in a way that we didn't at some distant past. A good friend who lives in Calgary who talks about how summer has shifted his imagination from being a time of vacation, relief from work, enjoyment, the good weather, and so on, to something that he dreads. Summer has gone from the best season in his imagination to the worst season. I now think of summer as a time of trepidation. The late spring, perhaps, as a time of imagining or anticipating when things are going to go bad and what that will mean for the months to come. So I'm interested especially in new kinds of anxieties or melancholia that are now part of our lives. Okay, so that's I'm very optimistic on, but that's some of what I want to be talking about tonight. But there's something else that is accompanying wildfire on my slide here, and that of course is poetics. In my field of study in English and humanities courses in general, we typically give a content warning at the beginning of any lecture if any sensitive material is going to be presented, anything that might be difficult for the audience. My content warning this evening is that this talk includes poetry, and quite a lot of it, in fact. This is the third time I've taught a course in Bamfield. As a lifelong Vancouver Islander, I feel very much at home here, even though this is not my home place. I enjoy being here. But professionally, I still, the third time around, feel like a bit of an imposter being here. That is to say, what those of us in the pursuit of the middle class are actually doing here is a bit of a question mark. Obviously, the scientists are here for good reason. We, as students of literature, as students of the humanities, of culture, have a lot to learn from scientists. And I do believe that we have a lot to contribute to conversations that scientists are having as well. But it's a bit less clear how the conversation works in that other direction. So I've been thinking about what it is that we are doing here, the writers and the humanists. And I think one point of connection between what we do and what people on the side of the group do is that we are all profoundly interested in place. And so the scientists working working in location are attending to certain aspects and phenomena of a particular location. But it turns out that people in the humanities and the arts are also often interested in place. And so part of my interest in what I'm calling wildfire poetics has to do with my scholarly and creative attention to particular geographies. So what I want to do tonight is a couple of things closely related. I want to talk about some writers who are not me, who have been writing about the new time, climate of fire in Western Canada, BC in particular. And then I want to read some of my own writing about fire, because we're going to inform you, I'm a poet as well as a scholar of literature. So I thought the best thing that I could do here at Bamfield was to contribute some poems. Okay, so that's the general plan of attack. So I think everyone probably knows, because you read the news, that there have been a succession of extraordinary fires over the past decade in Western Canada. I'm not a fire scientist. I do not presume to comment on the fire themselves. But one of the things that writers do, and people who are commentators on the writing that writers produce, is notice things. And the kinds of things they notice have to do with environmental phenomena, but also human reaction to them. So I'm especially interested in what writers are saying about what it is like to live with fire. And so it's almost inevitable that this understanding of environmental phenomena comes in personal terms. So thinking about the language that people are using to talk about fire and their relation to it, and their relation to place. I'm thinking about ways that they register the impact of these new conditions. So I'm trying to say that probably we all have memories or experiences of certain fires that are hard to get out of our mind. And one that really resonates for me was from the evening of June 30th, 2021, when I went for a walk after my children were in bed. I escaped for a little bit and went up for a walk up one of the low hills that dot the landscape around Victoria. And because it was near the solstice, it was still light at nearly 9 o'clock. And it had been a clear day all day. But the views across the Strait of Georgia toward the mainland of British Columbia had become blurry. The skyline had suddenly become smeared. As someone put a fingerprint on my glasses. And as I was walking along, my phone started buzzing, and news from the interior was suddenly popping up, both on the news feed, but also on messages that people were sending me directly. I have family in Kamloops, and all of a sudden, photos of dense smoke started appearing. And then I got a text message that 5 years later is still chilling. It said, "Sounds like Lytton is gone," which was true. And so these particularly vivid memories, I think, are difficult for us to make sense of in some ways, especially if they suggest experiences that are seemingly unprecedented. I'm curious about what writers do to try to make sense of these particularly difficult experiences. Okay, so when I put on my professorial hat, I'm trying to take a bigger picture of what's going on culturally. And it strikes me that all of a sudden it is possible to talk about something called wildfire literature. Enough people have started paying attention to a body of work has emerged. And so we could prepare something like a reading list for fire studies, which the word for that I like to use is a pyrocumulonimbus curriculum. This has not caught on yet, but it will, like wildfire. And so this reading list could include works from all kinds of genres. There are autoethnographic works or sociological works like Matthew Desmond's On the Fire Line, which is kind of an anthropology of wildfire fires. Books of memoir such as Kelly Ramsey's Wildfire Days from 2025. And then there's also fiction, poetry, history. We can make a long list. Now, my particular interests are in poetry. So that's, I suppose, why I noticed a body of wildfire poetry emerging in particular. Now, on the one hand, this is not a surprise. People who are writers tend to write about anything that is happening. So if wildfires are happening, then it stands to reason that poets are going to be writing about this. So it's not so much the fact that books of poetry about wildfire exist that's interesting. What matters is what they are trying to say. So this is what I've been paying attention to in recent years. And it strikes me that a lot of the writing about wildfires emphasizes the eeriness of newly experienced phenomena. Something strange is going on, to my phrase. And writers are trying to capture or express that very strangeness. Maybe not trying to make sense of it, but to convey the difficulty of experiencing these things. There's a poem by a Canadian poet named Karen Soley. The poem's called Smoke. And this is from a book called Wellwater, which came out last year. And she's using the biblical language of Genesis to describe the disorientation of waking into a manifestation of the old world. In other words, she woke up into the world that was unlike what she had experienced before. So she writes as follows. The first morning on waking, I thought it was fog or mist. I thought it had rained, but the ground was dry. The fires she's writing about are in northern Alberta and Saskatchewan, but her poem is set 800 miles south where the sky was yellow. By the evening of the fifth day, and at the end of the poem, the speaker has realized what smoke is. It's particulate, she writes, of houses, plants, and animals. So the smoke that was the subject of the poem is revealed not to be smoke, and not fog, and not mist, but in fact the transformed material of other lives, which she's experiencing at a great remove. And the sense of there being no parallel with which to understand this new experience is what stands out to me in this poem. This is a passage from a book called Fire Weather by John Gallion, a journalist. And probably some people in this room have read this book because it was a tremendous bestseller. There is a account of this. Anyone else read this book? We have a fire. Does anyone know this book? Well worth reading. It's about the Fort McMurray wildfires in 2016. And in this passage, he is emphasizing the novelty of our fires. He says, wildfires live and die by the weather, but the weather doesn't mean the same thing it did in 1990 or even a decade ago. And the reason the Fort McMurray fire trended on news feeds around the world in May 2016 was not only because of its terrifying size and ferocity, but also because it was a direct hit, like Hurricane Katrina on New Orleans, on the epicenter of Canada's multi-billion-dollar petroleum industry. That industry and this fire represent supercharged expressions of two trends that have been marching in lockstep for the past century and a half. Together, they embody the spiraling synergy between the headlong rush to exploit hydrocarbons at all costs and the corresponding increase in heat-trapping greenhouse gases that is altering our atmosphere in real time. In the spring of 2016, halfway through the hottest year of the hottest decade in recorded history, a new kind of fire introduced itself to the world. So I think this passage vividly conveys the sense that something is happening now that has not happened before. So the problem, as I'm imagining it for literary authors, is how to address this novelty and how to make it simultaneously appreciable, intelligible by their readers without losing sense of eeriness or the mysterious nature of these fires. I'm struck in this passage by the idea that the weather doesn't mean the same thing anymore. It's not only the novelty that's interesting, but the meaning that we attach to it. As everyone knows, probably the weather is a great thing to talk about with people with whom you have no connection. This is prime subjects of meaningless conversation. But if you can't talk about the weather anymore at the bus stop in the morning on your way to class because the weather itself has changed, then that signals a profound disruption in what we consider the normal course of affairs. So this is a version or variation on the problem of climate. If you're worried about climate change, then it becomes very difficult to treat the fact that it's too hot today or too cold yesterday as something that is normal. So I'm interested in the way that seemingly everyday activities have been disrupted, certainly politicized. So in this paragraph, Valiant is really interested in size. The terrifying size and ferocity of the Fort McMurray fire. But he conveys what he's writing about in militaristic terms. A direct hit, the epicenter, marching in lockstep, and so on. And this is a kind of obvious thing to say about this passage. He's trying to make a point, so I'm certainly not being critical of his vocabulary. But the sort of energetic language that he uses here should be a reminder to us always that all writers always have to choose the language that they are using to express a certain set of ideas. So if we notice that he's writing a particularly kind of energetic prose that depends on a certain register of language, that should invite us to ask, well, what are the alternatives? What other ways of writing might exist? So I have another passage here from the same book that gives us something of the same idea with a different set of terms. Cathedrals, museums, and libraries are all common sanctuaries where we can safely learn, reflect, explore, and simply be. Sanctuaries, almost by definition, are not supposed to burn, nor are rainforests, marshes, or sequoia groves. The human and natural world, our collective sanctuary and memory palace, has entered a new precarity. So the idea of the novelty is consistent here in this phrase, the new precarity. But by talking about the natural world as our collective sanctuary, he's drawing on a different set of associations, I think creating a different kind of emotional register. Not everyone in this room, but a lot of people will have come to Bamfield by going through Cathedral Grove on the way to Fort Alberni. The metaphor of the natural world as a cathedral is everywhere, in and out of books. And here Valiant is drawing on that association of the natural world as a sacred place that is being disrupted, as he says, in certain kinds of landscapes that are not prone to burning the sun. This is the title page of a book of poems called Burning Sage by the writer named this book came out in 2023, and it's notable for a variety of reasons, but the main consideration, I think, is that the poet was, well, and still is, a resident of Lytton, and therefore someone who actually witnessed the fire I was talking about a few moments ago, the fire from 2021. And one of the other notable things about this book, I think, is the speed with which it was published. And so this stands as a kind of noteworthy documentary representation. This is as close to real time as the writing and publishing of poetry can be. 2 years between events. In the book, yes, moving slowly, but in the poetry world, this is actually pretty fast. So this book stands out to me as being noteworthy for the fact that it records very, very close experience. You won't be able to read that, but optometrist says. The last paragraph says, remember this moment, breathe in deeply, feel the beauty of this little place, because tomorrow it will all be gone. This is a poem that is set immediately prior to the destructive fire. And although the specifics of the Lytton fire are what this book is about, this idea that tomorrow it will all be gone, I think resonates more generally, and again suggests the precarity that Valiant is talking about. It might all just Another book from the same year, 2023, by a poet named Anthony Rice. It's called Scorch. And I'm interested in this poem called After the Forest Fire, which is about attending to certain elements of the landscape. The wild rose drops its petals on the blackened ground, she says. The deer startles, and the daytime moves from above, white against blue. Poetry is about noticing the deer, the hillside, the moon. There's nothing left here to burn, but there is a newness in the half-lit ball pushing through soot. I will return for chocolate lilies, their purple and yellow skins, flecked like a burn. So in this poem, as opposed to the book of reporting that I was mentioning, or previous book of poems, the forest fire here is imagined not as a disaster, not as a catastrophe in the world, but as something that is transformative, but not entirely destructive. So there is an after. That is the first fact that the title tells us. And what comes after the fire? Flowers, the deer, the hillside is there, the moon, and there's a newness. So I'm struck by the way different writers are using the same word. Newness in Valiant's account is something to be feared. The new wildfires are so destructive. But in the context of this poem, the newness suggests actually the continuity of life. After the destructive fire, there is new growth, and there's the possibility, therefore, of worlds to come. And then in this other poem, the title suggests, again, this newness or reinvention. We have a new language. And if there is a new language, that presumes that there are going to be people to speak it. So again, the idea of carrying on after the transformative fire is an issue. And then the last other poet I will mention is a fellow whose name is invisible at the top of his badly scanned book cover. His name is Matt Rader. He's a professor at UC Okanagan. In my estimation, one of the best poets around these days. And he has this also illegible poem called Fine. I have a spelling quiz for everyone. So I think that's what you wanted on a Tuesday night. Who's good at spelling? Okay, one person. Yeah. So what is the word fine like?
What do you mean?
What's it close to?
Fire.
Yeah, exactly. Okay. So when we see the title fine, we're already thinking fire. Okay, that's how this works. So the poem begins. Where I live, there were still grasslands. Okay, remember, this is set in the interior of BC. Where I lived, there were still grasslands, but very few, between the condos, roadways, and subdivisions. The grasses, my friend said, were fire in its low entropy state, but fire was no kind of grass. I wanted to say something back then about the synonyms territory, state, condition. I wanted to make a shift from fire to fine. Its averageness, its elegance, its penalty. Then the helicopters lifted the cold, dark energy of the lake into the sky. Like a chalice. There was an icon on my phone that looked like a face disguised by smoke. There were masks that helped us breathe by restricting our breathing. And the poem goes on. I won't read the whole thing. But the problem that it sends out is how to go from fire to fine. How do you achieve the normalcy of fine, the boringness of the word fine, that wonderfully unpoetic word that no poet should use? How do you make fine out of fire? How do you deal with the paradoxes that wildfires and similar phenomena create? So, for example, there's the contradiction of masks that help us breathe by restricting our breathing. Okay, we figured out this particular problem, but the image suggests a wider lot of people are doing this, which is to say, a lot of writers are trying to make sense with different strategies of these shared phenomena that, of course, affect us all. So, one of the people trying to do that is yours truly. And I should say that poets are not like, all on the same committee, right? We're not all meeting to decide what to do. Instead, this is kind of happening in the sense that people independently by themselves are all noticing similar kinds of things and responding to them in their different ways. And then over time, it becomes clear that something is happening. Okay. So when I started noticing all of this stuff and struggling to find words for it, it's suddenly too hot in summer in Victoria where I live, and it's too dry. We live in a drought climate, but even so, it was getting too dry. We were having smoke days. The sunsets were wonderfully, but kind of horrifically vivid. It was humid all of a sudden. It smelled like smoke. I was noticing all of these things, and then the other thing that was happening in my life was that I started having these children appear, or they were about to appear. And so I was trying to make the adjustment mentally between all of the promise of starting a family with what seemed to be the apocalyptic vibes on the horizon. So I started putting together some poems, and I was guided by these seemingly contradictory synchronicity of these different things happening in my life. One thing, of course, being personal, and the other one being collective or public. So I was thinking about children, and then we were all thinking in the language of the news report, the fact that wildfire was everywhere. British Columbia was placed under a state of emergency as more than 500 wildfires overwhelmed the province's firefighting capacity, and officials conceded the only thing that will help is rain. So that was a news report, but it sounded to me like that was actually a prayer. I was waiting for rain. Okay. So this is a poem called Coursing a Stag. This is before baby arrived. Smoke from the interior has blown overnight across the strait, and wake late to a soporific haze, another miasma of all-day barbecue. We stroll at sunset when the air has cooled enough to breathe. Months of pregnant heat pass slowly under scrutiny. The southern island is overrun by macadaisical deer. Municipal sages discuss ad nauseum birth control and a humane cull. The does lolling on the front line, fed up with stolen vegetables, let foursomes play through while we wander down the path past forward, browning lawns. Only the fawn shows signs of life, dish ears tracking her dozy progress. Fumes waft over it and us alike as cars exhaust themselves up the adjacent hill. The polluted sun shades as it sinks from persimmon to ash. At season's end, time melts into Spartan landscape. Back on smoggy Jackson Street, the lettuce spared for now, we inhale the charcoal sky and wait. So then a baby was born and the fire started coming. This is called Forest Fire. Smoked cantaloupe for dessert. As our son turns 3 weeks old, and across the Gulf, in embered mountains, dry trees turn in the vines of summer to snare winter's wind, should it blow this year of thirst. I was writing these poems about fire and being an observer of fire. And I was also trying to think about the ways in which I, and maybe all of us, are caught up in the broad social, economic, cultural contexts that contribute to climate change, to self-portrait in like Christine suit. Showing pictures. Victoria will know that the place is overrun with middle-aged cyclists. World championships every morning. Riding against time, I am the future incarnate. My metronome feet are wrapped in polyurethane and polyamide, their unyielding souls cleated to the carbon machine. My polystyrene head catches no wind, and my limbs, clad in copolymers, are as dragless as money will buy. Last century's chemistry dresses me in day glow, from prescription sunglasses to baby toes. I am a testament to progress in industry. But when I pedal my clunker virtuously to the supermarket, the 1800s toss and turn and blink. Although I'm ready for life on Mars, some part of me pines for horses, the world before combustion. I read one more fire poem, and then maybe something else. This poem is called Being on Fire. And it struck me as I was thinking about all of these things that it is impossible to escape this new world. That even if we are not actually observing a wildfire, but alone being on the front lines, we somehow still always caught up in this new environment. What is the shape, the taste of summer light that comes to rest on arid hills at the edge of the world as my window squares it? Already leaves have fallen, the undergrowth, burgeoning basket of scraps and drafts. I see only brittle kindling and firelighter, hear nothing but matches striking. This climate summons abstractions into differences. Cirrus is the sky's bunting, the scarlet tanagers and orioles that winter in my sleep whistle incendiary tunes. From the resolute birds Stevens wrote, fiery feathers hang. It sings beyond us alone. Alone, I have no words for the phoenix, whose throat is full of its own accord with wordless songs. And I have no ideas before this view but final thoughts. The grass, the moss, the dirt, and the stone have been drained. The slug, the frond, the fern have been drunk by mere being, the swelter that simply is. I borrow again from the poet to ask, what is this smoke, the stormy gleam? I dwell on what I glimpse of the ocean, as if that saline casement were not framed by the foul shore. I repeat my rusted self. Should fire drakes and blazing set fever skies alight, no watchers would notice. Dull portents escape us. Everything is sour, past out of humor. Trust me. My belly is full of glass. My eyes are rubbed with sand. And I have been left in the kiln to burn. Then there are kids who remind you that you can't just look around and write sad poems all the time. This poem is called Nap. Giant sequoia and bristlecone pine, honey mushroom and creosote bush, yucca, quaking aspen, and palmer's oak. The oldest living things in the world glance up at me from the coffee table book. I study the expert photographs to catch time whispering, to hear age hum. Ringing in my ears, the drowsy pause between the last meal and the next walk. The youngest living thing I know sleeps behind the door. He and the bristlecone, getting on with the business of going on. And I think a lot of the writers I'm studying, a lot of the writers I'm talking about are interested in a sense of going on. How do we find a way to acknowledge what I was talking about before, is the eeriness of wildfire season without falling into the trap of despair? How do we think about a future in a livable world, even as we acknowledge what's going on around us? Okay, I'm going to read one one last poem, which is a kid poem more than a climate poem. But to my mind, it's also looking ahead and going on. It's called Bad Trip, which I think has a Bamfield connotation, but that's not the kind of bad trip thing. Okay, so we screwed up, misread the map, a day's drive from home, another day's hike from the car. Late summer in the Bailey Range. Everywhere we looked, black bears getting fat and sleepy. And sure, off by a mile or so, we set up camp at the wrong scenic site. Wrong, we discovered, when up the path charged the rightful booker, frothing, profane, a man on fire. Some wiry old guy. Clad in canvas pilot of a hybrid Subaru, no docile NBC shopper. The survivalist type instead, veteran of a hidden war, ready to be shared. We'd already unpacked, applauded the view, boiled water, duly fastened despite our mistake, park permit to state tent. Our new friend yanked that nylon pod off the ground, looking desperate to tell us he'd kill us unless we got the fuck out of there. We got the fuck out fast. In sleek pajamas, cups of half-cooked noodles in hand, rucksacks crammed with unsorted gear, we half ran, half fell down the trail, turned sharp at faded signpost, searched for high ground, hedged for the night. Which is when we met there, around the next gravelly switchback, a lumbering wall. 3 more steps and we could have touched the bear's flank, seen what it smelled as it nosed toward the sunless bank. If he'd been polite, we could have shaken hands. We had half an hour of light and no ideas. This was no picnic, no waltz, no circus. As I said, we messed up. That was the last time your mother and I went camping. We ran out of weekends, of season. There was work. And then, when we were due to think of cribs and rocking chairs, Cat Basin and the Sawbuck Road got forgotten. The next summer, the long walk was another creature, and we hardly left home, just in case. The bear, the man, the whole bad trip belonged to a different life, not ours. Finally, you invited us to dance. We bowed, took you by the heel, and dipped you in the bracing river that paws at the bed. We're delighted to answer any questions. We can also
Any questions? I'm curious, did you start writing about fire, thinking about fire, or did you start reading other people's ideas about fire? Like, what came first for you?
Well, I think, yeah, so the question is what came first? Am I reading about fires or am I writing about fires? And I think probably they both happen kind of at the same time. Writing is slow, and the news is fast. So, yeah, it's both. I think the answer to answer your question, I would say is that for a long time I've had an interest in writing about place and writing about things that happen in the natural world, for lack of a better term. And over time, the fire interest became more pronounced. So I'm always reading what other writers are writing, and I'm always thinking about this kind of stuff that over time is announced itself as a facet of this project. Any questions come up? Otherwise, thanks again for listening.
Thank you so much for such a wonderful evening. Great way to spend the evening together. We have this week at PMSC 2 seminars for the price of 1. They're both free. Our next one is Friday at 4 p.m. We'll be back in the same room. Speaking of like exciting different things, something that's near and dear to me, I feel like very specific to PMSC and our sense of place are the species and organisms that live here. At 4 p.m. on Friday afternoon, right before happy hour, perfect timing. The folks from the Shaw Center for the Salem Sea and folks from the Bamfield Historical Society are coming together at 4 p.m. to give a talk about our basking shark population. And our basking shark history is like the history we know. Our current state of basking sharks is kind of a big question mark, and it's a really interesting story as well as just a scientific ecological thing that we have here in Bamfield. So that's Friday at 4 p.m. right here, and our seminar next week is 7 p.m. next Tuesday. My final announcement is if you're in a chair that's